myself I wouldn't do another video anytime soon because I'm kind of allowing my private business to be unattended to. But I couldn't help myself when I pulled up a Mormon Stories podcast by John DeLynn, in which appears his mother. Now, I haven't had time to listen to the entire 3 episodes because, to tell you the truth, I just can't. I don't have the time right now. But I invite everybody there to review this video and then review some of the genealogical work done on Ezra T. Benson. Ezra T. Benson was a particular note to me because I went to Quincy, Illinois, to pull some of the documents and some of the records there on the Nauvoo Mormon migration. And it was Quincy, Illinois, that sponsored and allowed the Mormon saints who were thrown out of Missouri to cross the river, and the whole Quincy citizenry joined together to feed and clothe these Mormon saints through the winter, which allowed them to get on their feet, allowed them to start relocating into Illinois. Well, one of the things that I pulled in the historical data in Quincy was the role that Ezra T. Benson played in Quincy and organizing the rescue of these Mormon saints. He was pivotal. And so when I went to Nauvoo, I mentioned that to some of the missionaries, an older missionary couple that were in the, I believe, the Remington house, or it might be the Winchester house. Anyway, a famous gunsmith was located in Nauvoo and outfitting the Nauvoo saints with all these guns. And you can kind of trace these guns as they go down the river from William Boggs' store on the Mississippi River down to Nauvoo with the Mormon Danites. And they're outfitting all the Nauvoo people with these guns. So anyway, but I mentioned that to the couple that were demonstrating the gunsmith factory in Nauvoo. And I mentioned that Ezra T. Benson had been one of the heroes of the saints and had allowed Quincy, Illinois, to welcome the saints and to put them up, give them shelter and food through the winter. And that he was thought of as quite a heroic person in Quincy. And what was interesting is I just was met with these blank stares. It was like this Mormon couple had never even heard of Ezra T. Benson and his heroic efforts to rescue the saints in Quincy. So it piqued my interest because John DeLynn's mother, her great-grandparents, both dead before she was born or had any memory, was Ezra T. Benson. And Ezra T. Benson, here he is in Wikipedia. There's a nice picture of him. Well, I always thought very highly of Ezra T. Benson when I learned about his heroic efforts on behalf of the saints. But again, you never know if these people are good Mormons or bad Mormons, because there was a lot of shenanigans going on between Brigham Young and his secret brotherhoods. And so you never know if some of these stalwart Mormon saints that had followed Brigham Young out west were true believers in the mission of expanding westward to find a homeland where they could be free, where they could practice their religion in freedom without being constantly assaulted by these vigilante groups that were just terrorizing not only the Mormon saints, but all the settlers in the state as well, because these Mormon vigilantes, or the vigilantes in general, were financed by the British oligarchs to cause this havoc in a lead up to the Civil War. It's called a false flag, and you dress the people as Indians, and then you blame it on the Indians when you kill and steal everybody's homes on the prairie. Indians are good fall guys, right? And they did that in, well, Boston Tea Party, they dressed as Indians and whatever. So the Indians themselves many times were just white men dressed up like Indians, or they were so deluded in their Indian blood, maybe an eighth Indian or whatever, but they called themselves Indians so they could get special privileges and also be free from these slave laws. But notwithstanding, so I went to this genealogical site on Ezra Chap Benson, and you can also find Ezra T. Benson in the Illinois historical records, and he's mentioned there, and that's where I discovered his heroic efforts in helping the saints. But you always have to read between the lines when you study these genealogical stories, because a lot of them are fabrications, because a lot of the people are imposters. They kill people and then take on their name and change their birth certificates and change their names. They become the people and steal their land. That was quite common. That's why all the court records were being burned down in the lead up to the Civil War, starting with 1812. Also, patent offices. And you've got quite a few Mormons coming across the plains, inventing patents like, oh, the war armaments, I guess. There's patents that belong to Mormons. The odometer was one. And then I believe the tractor was a patent invented by a Mormon, just coincidentally. They're not only brave sorts, but they're also very smart. But long story short, it does appear that Ezra T. Benson might be one of the good Mormons, because while he had 4 wives, which I realized as I did my own genealogy, a lot of the early settlers had more than 1 wife, because they were trying to populate a country that was unpopulated when they arrived. When the people landed from Europe into the Virginia colony, there were only 1,500 people to kickstart the U.S. continent. Now, I know there were lots of Native Americans, but who knows who was in charge of killing off the Native Americans? It could be many different parties. I just don't know at this point in time. But long story short, there's a pattern here that follows Brigham Young. It appears that the minute that Ezra T. Benson builds a beautiful 2-story home for his family to move in from these little log cabins, Brigham Young comes around and orders him on a mission to settle Cache Valley in Idaho, and ordered him to sell his brand new home to Elder Wells, one of Brigham Young's counselors. Well, this, in fact, also happened to John D. Lee when he was in Missouri, or when he was in Illinois, Nauvoo. He'd just finished a beautiful home for his family, and Brigham Young admired it and coveted it, and just asked if John D. Lee would give him the home, and they could build him another home next to Brigham Young. And, of course, John D. did this because he was under that blood atonement fear. Because he knew if he didn't obey, he would more than likely be killed. And I know this from John D. Lee because he states it very openly when he was settling the Mormon outpost in Adam Diamond in Missouri, that some of the saints had complained to Brigham Young that John D. Lee had taken all the good pieces of property, and they were quite unhappy. So Brigham Young notified John D. Lee that he was going to give him a visit. And John D. Lee reports that he was fearful in his boots, knowing that at the end of the meeting with Brigham Young, he may not be alive. And so he relates the story how Brigham Young, his adopted father, mind you, walks up to his cabin and sits down with him, and they go and have a meeting about these complaints. Well, John D. Lee, to his great relief, states that Brigham Young was fairly satisfied, happy, gave him a big slap on the back, and left. And John D. Lee reports that he was relieved, not knowing if he'd be alive at the end of that visit. So I know that this threat of these Danites and the secret brotherhood of Brigham Young was quite a real threat. So what occurs with Ezra T. Benson? He goes through that same thing of Brigham Young coveting his home and taking it and forcing him on a mission up to Cache Valley. Well, also related in this genealogy is that at the time that Ezra T. Benson was working on the Union Pacific Railroad and expended many of his own funds in assisting the railroad, that by the end, Brigham Young reneged on his debt. That at the time, he was owed close to $200,000, I think. You can read this. I'll leave a link. And Brigham Young refused to pay it. So as Ezra T. Benson was traveling by buggy from Cache Valley down to a conference in the Salt Lake Valley, he suddenly drops dead at 58. Now, reading between the lines and the blood atonement and knowing that Brigham Young killed off all witnesses and killed off people that he owed money to, I have to make a rational conclusion that I believe that it's more probable than not that Ezra T. Benson was one of these good saints that believed in the calling to expand the West, to find a homeland for people, refugees, real refugees that had no home, including slaves, including Mormons, including all sorts of people that were being dispossessed systematically by British oligarchs and their British agent, Brigham Young, which, of course, that's my working theory, is that Brigham Young was a British agent, but also that this blood atonement that was part of the Mormon theology at the time, that I'm reading between the lines that perhaps Ezra T. Benson was a victim of a blood atonement ritual and death simply because he owed Brigham Young. So just simply because Brigham Young owed him some money, that Brigham Young had defrauded good Mormon saints out of over $2 million of work they had done on this Union Pacific Railroad. You see, these type of psychopathic minds always are consistent. There's always a pattern, and the pattern is done over and over and over again. You can't make a contract with a psychopath because they will always break it, and in order to get all the greed, in order to get all the loot and all the property and all the power, they will kill you. And many of these saints ended up dead in Utah and in Idaho. So I just want to say a shout out to Ezra T. Benson and his family. Hey, you were part of the good Mormons.